Welcome back to the North Star Takes podcast. I'm Bailey, he's Jacob, and we're a Minnesota sports podcast. If you're a Minnesota sports fan, please click the like button on this video, especially if you're a Minnesota Vikings fan. And also feel free to subscribe to our channel here and get more Minnesota Vikings and Minnesota sports videos on your feed. Today we're going to be grading the Minnesota Vikings as we're about a quarter of the way through the season. If this was a traditional 16-game schedule, we would be a quarter of the way through the season, but they tacked on that extra game, so we'll still call it the quarter mark. And we're just going to kind of, it's kind of a state of the Vikings. Where are we at offense, defense, special teams wise? Maybe once we get to the halfway point of the season, we'll do a longer video about grading specific players or specific positions. But let's just jump in right off the bat, Liberta. Do you want to start with offense, defense, or special teams?
Start with the offense. I feel like that was the talk of the offseason, getting the new offensive-minded head coach. I think that's a great place to start.
All right, so obviously, it hasn't been pretty to start off with. I mean, we are 3-1. Offense has definitely had its moments in specific games. I mean, the Packers game, specifically the first half, Lions game, specifically basically the very end of the game. And then, of course, the Saints game, basically the end of that game too, and the first drive. So it's been extremely inconsistent. So I guess what kind of grade would you give them, factoring in it's a new head coach, new system, all that stuff? What kind of grade would you give them?
I think I'm looking at somewhere around a B-. I feel like with this offense, we have left a lot of stuff on the table. Maybe this boils down more to Kirk in this last game. Saw a few looks on Twitter that he missed against the Saints that really could have put this game away a lot sooner than got the horn in the fourth quarter with Lutz, the double doink missed field goal. I feel like that game could have been put away long before that. But again, I got to cut him a little slack. We're 4 weeks into this new system that he has with O'Connell. It's probably about as complex as he's ever seen. Yeah. So going to give him a little break there. But again, looking more at the offense as a whole here without specifically calling out Kirk here, I'd say, B- because I think they've been pretty inconsistent, really. Like you said, they've had flashes where they've looked really good. That entire Green Bay game, well, I should say really that first half of that Green Bay game, they looked really good. But then outside of that, then you had an opening drive against the Saints that looked really awesome just because they got everybody involved. It was just really smooth and even overcame that penalty against Jefferson on the would have been an Osborne touchdown. Then it turned into a Madison screen pass touchdown.
Right.
But outside of that, that Philly game was obviously a disaster. The Lions, it was kind of up and down, started slow, and then got it going at the end. But it's just, too much irregularness, I guess. But the thing is, they're finding ways to win, so that's why I'd grade them above an average, like a C. I think like a B-, because I think they're still putting points on the board, which is good, and we've certainly had our chances. So, I think that's what it boils down to for me. It's not great, but it's not I think it's just slightly above average too. I think obviously more to come, but I think for where we're at with a new head coach, I think is fine and reasonable. So B-. How about you, Bailey?
Yeah, you kind of talked me into a higher grade. I was going to give them about a C.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to say I'm right around a C plus B-. I echo a lot of the same points you do. There's been opportunities there, which honestly gives me hope because I think Kevin O'Connell really knows what he's doing in terms of scheming up an offense, calling plays at the right time. Maybe Kirk isn't necessarily seeing these opportunities, or to him, it doesn't really look like, a corner is coming forward rather than going backwards, stuff like that. So I don't know. I think it's been about average. You're right. I mean, it's just it's annoying just given the skill position players we have.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, I mean, it is a new system. They're all learning it. Kirk Cousins, obviously, you can tell when he's got a lot on his mind or, when he's overwhelmed. So he's not always a calming presence, which is okay. Not all quarterbacks are. But at the same time, though, I have been impressed with the offensive line. I think they've actually overperformed from what my expectations were. I think we were hopeful going into the season that Christian Darrisaw would continue to look like a stud. We already knew Brian O'Neill was. But Christian Darrisaw has looked fantastic so far this season. He's literally one of the best tackles in football, run block and pass block. Ezra Cleveland's really solidified himself as just he's not fantastic, but a good, solid left guard. Ed Ingram is holding his own at right guard. I mean, he hasn't been one of the best by any means, but especially in pass protection, I think he's struggled a little. But it's not like he's had horrific grades, like our right guards of the last several years have. Dakota Dozier, Mike Remmers. I mean, that only to name a few. Pat Elflein. Like the list goes on and on. But and then you got Garrett Bradbury, who we all were out on. We thought, oh, this is his last year here. We've seen enough of him. He's like the eighth highest graded center in football right now somehow. So, and that even factors in a pretty decent pass block win rate. So I don't know what's really changed for him, but maybe it's the scheme as well. But maybe O'Connell's hiding his deficiencies. He's just done a solid job, and that's really all we need out of Bradbury. We don't need him to be. We don't need all 5 offensive linemen to be Pro Bowlers.
Yeah.
It would be nice. So I've been impressed with the offensive line. But then another thing I haven't been so impressed with, obviously Jefferson's had 2 dud games. Thielen was kind of in and out except for the last couple games here. Osborne, I know he's the third guy. I'd still like to see him get the ball a little bit more too. But then you also factor in that the run game hasn't looked very great yet.
True. The run game's been bad.
And I don't know. People are, trying to sound the panic alarm on Dalvin Cook already. I don't think it's really him. I'm just not sure the running lanes are quite there. And I know he's got to make guys miss too. But, like, I'm not ready to sit there and say Dalvin Cook's washed up. He's 26, 27 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He's still got some juice in the tank. So I think we'll see the run game get better as the season goes on as well. But I think a lot of it is just being able to sustain drives. We have so many 3 and outs that, Cook's not really getting the carries. The offense isn't moving the ball, keeping the defense on its heels. So it's like, if you're getting 3 and outs, the defense kind of knows your tendencies a little bit. They know when you're going to want to run. They know when you're going to want to pass. You got to keep drives going and keep it unpredictable. So I think that all kind of factors into it as well. So yeah, I'll give it about a C plus, I'll say, for the offense. Definitely room to improve, but it hasn't been a total disaster by any means.
Yeah, I like that summation. I think now that I guess wasn't considering the run game enough. Our run game has been pretty rough, so I'd probably would bump him more down to a C plus because I think that you need to be a more complete offense, and we certainly aren't that right now. But I've seen enough flashes in the passing game that I really like, and I think the looks are going to be there, and hopefully Kirk's going to hit on more of them as the season goes on.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump to the defense, Alberto. What you got for the defense?
I'm going to give them a solid C. I think they are very average because I don't think they're doing anything fantastic to just go out there and single-handedly win us games, but I don't think they're going out there and losing us games either. Like, for instance, in Philly, our one loss this year, like they had about as bad as you can get first half. It felt very reminiscent of that 38-7 game, the NFC Championship a handful of years ago. But again, it looked like more same then, but they come out in the second half. They really gave our offense an opportunity to get back in the game. They just didn't take it. So I think that was a frustrating night for our whole team, but especially that offense in the second half. But that's another story. But speaking of that defense, kind of reeling it back in here, I would say that they've had good halves of football. It's just not one of those things, a little inconsistent, where I feel like it takes us a little bit to get going, which is kind of frustrating. I mean, I guess in that first half against the Saints, we held them under 100 yards of offense, and then at the end of the game, we couldn't stop them. Like, I scored in every possession, which was frustrating. So, like, I'd say I've seen about as much good as I've seen bad, and I think if you average out between where we rank as far as points allowed compared to yards allowed, I think we are like middle of the league. So that's where I feel like with the grades too. I feel like it's a dead C for us, where it's like I think there's room for improvement, but at the same time, I think if we can get just a little bit better as far as really consistency goes, I'd take it because I'm not expecting this defense to be great, but right now I think they're pretty squarely average. So where'd you put them at, Bailey?
I would give them a C as well. I was trying to think a little higher, but then as you kind of rattled through those things, it's like, man, that's true. It's just that, yeah, the points given up hasn't been egregious, but the yards has been. I can't forgive them for that first half against the Eagles or even the first half against the Detroit Lions where
that too.
They just let Jared Goff and DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams just like run it down their throat and just go straight down the field with little resistance. Like, I mean, the shell defense is just, it's frustrating. I get why they're doing it because they don't necessarily trust that these corners can play great man-to-man. Although I think we saw Cam Dantzler played pretty good man-to-man against the Saints in week 4. So yeah. I think Dantzler's improving. I think Patrick Peterson, I did think he was washed at the beginning of the season, but I think he's still playing okay. He's had some flashes of playing okay. Do I want him playing man coverage the whole game? Absolutely not.
No.
I think Shannon Sullivan also has been a little bit of a bright spot at nickel corner just because I don't think a lot of people knew what to expect from him. He had a very average year with the Packers last year. I think a lot of people thought maybe he'd come in and just kind of struggle here, but he's actually been pretty decent, I think. So the corner situation outside of Andrew Booth not really being able to play yet, I think the corners have been okay. The most disappointing part to me really has been the pass rush. I mean, you haven't gotten really anything out of Daniil Hunter. Zadarius Smith, I think, has a couple sacks this season, and now he's a little banged up. But also at the same time, it's not like Dalvin Tomlinson and Harrison Phillips are stopping the run great either. So the whole defensive line in general just hasn't been fantastic. And maybe they're just adjusting to the scheme because I know Hunter is not used to that kind of scheme. So maybe he's adjusting a little to having to stand up and rush from that spot more rather than putting his hand in the dirt. So I'll give it a little more time there too. And then obviously, I think probably the most disappointing part of the defense in general is just, outside of, giving up the yards and stuff, is just that there hasn't been any contributions from rookies yet. Lewis Seen is now out for the season after just a horrible injury he suffered in London. Andrew Booth has been hurt basically this entire season so far. He hasn't contributed at all on defense. Brian Asamoah, third-round linebacker, which I get it. You have Jordan Hicks and Eric Kendricks, who are two of the best tackling linebackers in football, but I feel like at some point you could use Brian Asamoah's speed out there, especially if you're going to play a zone-type defense. Like, you could use a guy like him out there with his speed. So there hasn't really been any like young, whether it's a rookie or second-year player, or just any of these depth players, there hasn't really been a young player impact on this defense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like you said, I think that's the biggest thing to take away from this defense through 4 games is I think the calling card should be the pass rush for what we got with Hunter and Smith, obviously. And then even Wanham, I think, has had a pretty solid start for being a rotational pass rusher. And then you got, I know I've seen Patrick Jones a number of times, but it's just like, I feel like we could get a little bit more out of them, especially as far as pressures go. Like Daniil's got 8 through 4 games, which isn't great. So I'd like to see more there too. So I think if that improves, I think this defense is going to be right where we'd really want it to be, as far as like just being formidable enough where they're not just a pushover, but you're not expecting them to be like top 10 in the league either. So I think that's basically where we can make up that margin there. And I think that's very doable. I think hopefully as the season goes on, I think these guys will maybe Daniil gets a little more comfortable playing in a 3-4. So I think I'm not worried about it, at least not yet anyway. I think at this point there isn't too much to complain about. Certainly things to nitpick, but not too much to complain about. And then another thing, I'd love to see the run defense go better because we're just one of those teams right now who can't run the ball. We can't stop the run. And that's not a good recipe for success as far as really matching up with some of the best teams in this league when it comes down to it. Because if you can't do that, then man, you're going to struggle in these road games and these tough environments because you got to be able to run the ball at least a little bit and be able to stop the run so teams just can't kill you at the end of a game by doing that.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the run game on both sides of the ball has been a struggle so far. Let's jump to special teams here, Liberto. What do you got for a grade for these guys?
A+. I think these guys have been great. I think that Greg Joseph has nailed all the kicks you'd want him to. I know he missed an extra point against the Saints, and obviously that kind of changed the complexion of the game, but he had 5 field goals and was named the NFC Special Teams Player of the Week. So, he came through when he needed to, and I think his only other misses this year were I think he kicked 2 56-yarders against the Lions, but that's when we had the doors open, and I know they said it shouldn't have affected his kicks, like, oh, no, I just missed it, but I don't think that was the case, because you could see the ball go up in the air and just fly right, like, no.
And the Lions kicker did the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And they're saying it wasn't that, but I'm like, it definitely was that. But I mean, good for him for no excuses. Like, that's great. Right. But I think he's been great. And then Ryan Wright, I think he's been an awesome punter as far as like doing his job, I guess. And we haven't allowed any big punt returns and like that. And he had the fake punt pass, which is great. Yes. Honestly, that changed the game, being able to keep that possession alive, because I'm pretty sure we went on to, I want to say, score a touchdown.
Yes, I think so.
I think we did, yeah. So like that's a really big spot and really coming through for us. So that's obviously huge. And then as far as our coverage units go, like we blocked a field goal kick in Philly, and then I mean, Curse Boyd's got written all over these things. He had the recovery on that, and then this punt this last week against the Saints, another big one where Boyd made a play and then again gave our offense very advantageous field position. So I think the only thing you could possibly nitpick about this whole special teams unit, I mean in all facets, is probably just the kick return looks a little bit rough. I'd like to see Nwangu get a couple more better looks, but I guess that's I'm not too concerned about that. When the rest of the game is when the special teams comes into play, it looks good. So yeah,
Yeah.
I got no complaints about this special teams really. So yeah, A plus.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'll go A instead of A plus just because I'm a little harsher. But
Sure.
yeah, they've looked great. I mean, Greg Joseph. I mean, this guy is. We finally have a kicker that I think we can rely on, and Zimmer's out the door, so we don't have the whole Zimmer looking over Greg Joseph's shoulder,
Yeah.
um, type thing going on. So I think Joseph feels comfortable. He's kicking well. Ryan Wright has been a stud. I mean, just in terms of where he's pinning guys or how long of punts he's having, he's doing a great job. I agree with you though. I think the return game could be a little better, but no team's really given Wangu a chance, and I can't blame him. I mean, I think he's returned, maybe a couple times a game. It just seems like he's hardly ever had the ball. So,
True.
um, that makes it tough too. And, Jalen Rager, who's our punt returner, it's like, I'm not expecting amazing things out of him either. They basically brought him in so we can have a guy that can actually catch the punts, um, so I don't know. I mean, the return game is only a small part of how you can score points or get field position or whatever, but it is important still, and I'd like to see a little more explosiveness from there. But in terms of everything else, like you mentioned, punt coverage, kickoff coverage, I mean, punt coverage has been phenomenal. I think they haven't really let many guys slip past them for big runs. And like you mentioned, Chris Boyd's just been kind of flying all over the field. The blocked field goal play where Patrick Peterson actually jumps in and blocks a field goal, like that
Yeah.
was incredible. So yeah, it's weird because Viking special teams have been bad for so long under Mike Zimmer that it feels weird that this Matt Daniels special teams coordinator has got him. Got him playing really well, and I think a lot of people think he could potentially be a head coach one day. Just seems like he's got really strong leadership skills, good people skills. So I think the Vikings are in a good spot with special teams. Let's just hope that the offense and defense can kind of catch up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the special teams can kind of go unnoticed sometimes, but when you have a good unit, I think that could sneakily win you some games. They're just
Yeah.
really change games. I mean, for instance, on the flip side of things, when you have a bad special teams unit, it can straight up cost you games. Like, for instance, Green Bay. I think that's the first example comes to mind last year when they lost that game against the Niners when their offense just couldn't get anything
Yep.
going. Their special teams made it worse. They had that punt block for a touchdown. That was the only touchdown the Niners scored was in that entire game. They didn't score an offensive touchdown. They won 13-10 because they blocked the punt and housed it. So it's like, man, that
Yep.
can really screw you in some big spots. But just one of those things that for instance, I think this year so far through 4 games, I think the Viking special teams unit has the most expected points added, which for what that's worth and for everybody that's in the know as far as that goes, I think that's awesome. That's obviously isn't gonna it's only going to help you. So I think as
Right.
far as like field position goes, especially in close games that we've been playing in, sometimes that can be all the difference.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, in the NFL, you win games on the margins, and it's a game of inches. Anything can happen. So, yeah, I think now that we have a good special teams unit, obviously that's a good thing to have in our back pocket. It's still going to really come down to the offense and defense in terms of
Yeah,
how far this team's going to go.
totally.
But just getting that little extra help from special teams, getting the good field position, starting at the 40 or 50-yard line, as opposed to the 20-yard line can make a huge difference. So, any other final thoughts from you before we take off here, just about the Vikings in general at the quarter mark of the season?
Yeah, I'd say it feels like there's a lot to be desired, both offensively and defensively. But new head coach, new schemes on both sides of the ball. I think it's fair to give these guys some time to really get acclimated with everything they're doing, and we'll be able to reevaluate this at the mid-season point when it feels like you have a good enough sample size to work off of and see where the causes for concern really are. If any of these trends continue, like especially in the run game both ways, I think that'll be something to look at here in another few weeks, see where we're at. But I would say, yeah, it certainly feels like there's some things we left on the table, but we're 3-1 at the end of the day. So like that's what matters the most. It's all about end results in this league. So yeah, I
True.
can't complain too much.
Yeah, I'm with you. 3-1 is great, and we have a home game against the Bears, and then we have the Dolphins on the road. Tua potentially not playing, so those are our next 2 games before we head into the bye. And I think at that point, hopefully, during the bye week, O'Connell's able to make some good adjustments offensively. Maybe Donatel's willing to change some things defensively. Um, if you can get into the bye at 5-1 or 4-2, and then make these adjustments coming out of the bye, I mean, we could be sitting in a really good spot because the schedule coming out of the bye isn't scary by any means either until you really get to that Buffalo game. So, yeah, I think they're sitting in a good spot. It's great that they've been stacking these early wins. And I mean, I would like to think it can really only get better from here, not worse. So,
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. Well, that will do it for this edition of the North Star Takes podcast. Like I mentioned earlier, please click the like button on this video and feel free to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Feel free to give us a follow on both Twitter and Instagram. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. What kind of grades would you give the Vikings offense, defense, and special teams? And just any other thoughts on the Vikings' first 4 games of the season and where they may go from here. So until next time, thanks for watching.